The Galactic Senate chamber floated in the silent heart of the Andromeda Nexus, a vast ring of polished obsidian and humming energy fields where the fate of 1,000 worlds was decided. Delegates from every major system sat in tiered arcs, their faces lit by the soft blue glow of the central holodisplay. At the center of it all, the words scrolled slowly, deliberately, as if the universe itself held its breath. Earth had been found guilty, not of war, not of aggression, but of defiance, of refusing to bow. The charge was simple. Humanity had ignored repeated orders from the Galactic Concord to halt its deep space mining operations, dismantle its independent AI research labs, and surrender control of its off-world colonies. Earth's representatives had argued that these were matters of sovereignty, that humanity had earned its place among the stars through grit and innovation, not through obedience. But the Senate did not care for arguments from fringe species. The vote was called. One by one, the council members cast their judgment. The Krell hegemony, with their armored carapaces and cold, clicking voices, voted yes. The Lumari collective, their translucent skin shimmering with emotion they no longer felt, voted yes. Even the neutral systems, those who usually abstained, pressed their approval seals without hesitation. They feared what Earth might become if left unchecked, a species that built cities in deserts, that walked on the moon before it could feed all its children, that turned war into peace and then peace back into progress. That kind of species could not be trusted. The final count appeared in bold. Unblinking letters, 9 to 87 in favor, 0 opposed, 13 abstentions. Unanimous enough. The sentence was immediate. Earth would be declared a Class 5 non-compliant world. All trade suspended. All communication severed. All human vessels ordered to stand down or be destroyed. Within 6 solar cycles, Earth would either submit fully to Concord oversight or face total quarantine, cut off from the galaxy forever. Senator Lyra Voss of the Krell hegemony rose from her seat, her voice sharp as fractured glass. "Let this serve as a lesson to all fringe species," she declared, her words echoing through the chamber and across 1,000 relay stations. Defiance ends in erasure. On Earth, the news hit like a silent earthquake. There were no explosions, no sirens, just the quiet hum of billions of devices lighting up at once with the same message. In Houston, Texas, Daniel Carter stood in his small backyard, his hands still greasy from fixing the solar inverter on his roof. His tablet lay on the picnic table, screen glowing with the Senate's verdict. His 8-year-old daughter Lily peeked out the back door, her eyes wide. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky, not at the stars, but at the thin layer of atmosphere that had protected them for so long. He thought of the old NASA patches his grandfather kept in a drawer, of the first rover that crawled across Mars, of the fusion reactor he'd helped design that now powered half of Texas. All of it. Useless now. According to the galaxy. "No, Lily," he finally said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "We're not in trouble. We're just being watched." In Chicago, Nora Ellis sat on the edge of Lake Michigan, her bare feet in the cold water. She'd been collecting water samples for a study on microplastic decay when her wristband buzzed. The Senate's announcement played in a soft whisper through her earpiece. Around her, people stopped walking. Some cried. Others stared at their phones in stunned silence. A man nearby kicked a bench, then sat down and buried his face in his hands. Nora didn't move. She watched the waves lap against the shore, steady and patient. She remembered her college professor saying that life always finds a way, through ice, through fire, through darkness. Humans had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars. They'd split the atom and stitched genes together. They'd sent messages into the void, hoping someone would answer. And now the answer had come, not with curiosity, but with a gavel. She stood up, brushed the sand from her jeans, and walked back to her lab. Her team was already there, gathered around the main screen, faces grim. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The look in their eyes said everything. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Across the planet, the same quiet shift happened. In Nairobi, engineers rerouted power grids to hidden backup systems. In Oslo, programmers began scrubbing public networks of Concord-linked protocols. In Jakarta, shipbuilders quietly reopened dry docks that had been closed for decades. No orders came from governments, because governments were paralyzed, debating surrender or resistance. But the people didn't wait. They knew what had to be done. The conquered expected panic. They expected riots, pleas, maybe even a futile show of force. What they didn't expect was silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of focus. The kind of silence that comes before a storm builds its strength. In Geneva, the last official Earth delegate to the Senate, Ambassador Ruiz, stood alone in the empty human embassy. He deleted every file, wiped every server, and locked the doors behind him. As he walked away, he looked up at the night sky and smiled faintly. "You think you've won," he murmured. "But you just handed us a reason to become something you can't even imagine." Back in Houston, Daniel tucked Lily into bed. She held up a small model of the old International Space Station, its solar panels chipped from years of play. "Will we still go to space, Dad?" He sat on the edge of her bed, brushing hair from her forehead. "Yes," he said, "but not the way they want us to. We'll go our way." Outside, the city lights flickered, not from a blackout, but from a coordinated test of the new decentralized grid. Somewhere in the desert, a forgotten missile silo powered up for the first time in 50 years. In the ocean depths, autonomous drones began mapping new routes beneath the radar, and high above, in silent orbit, a handful of civilian satellites shifted their trajectories, forming a pattern no one in the conquered would recognize. Yet, the Galactic Senate had ruled against Earth. They believed the vote was final. They believed humanity would crumble under isolation. They believed their judgment was absolute. They were wrong. And that single, unanimous vote would become their final mistake. The Concorde enforcement fleet arrived 3 months after the Senate's verdict, sliding into Earth's orbital space like shadows cast by a dying sun. Their ships were sleek and silent, built not for war but for control. Long, needle-thin vessels with sensor arrays that pulsed like slow heartbeats. They took position around the planet without firing a shot, without broadcasting a threat. They simply blocked every lane in and out, severed every satellite link, and waited. Their message was clear: you are alone now. On the ground, life did not stop. But it changed. Cities dimmed their lights not from fear but from strategy. Power grids rerouted through hidden channels. Public broadcasts switched to local loops, then to encrypted mesh networks that bounced signals from rooftop to rooftop, car to car, phone to phone. The world went quiet, not because it had given up, but because it was listening, learning, preparing. In Houston, Daniel Carter no longer worked on solar inverters. He stood in a reinforced hangar beneath an old NASA storage facility, surrounded by engineers who hadn't slept in days. Before them sat a hulking machine, a deep space tug once used to nudge asteroids away from Earth's path. Now its frame was wrapped in layers of experimental shielding, woven from superconducting filaments and repurposed quantum foam. It looked clumsy, even ugly, next to the Concorde's elegant cruisers. But Daniel didn't care about looks. He cared about what it could do. "We tested the gravitic field at 1/10 power," said a young woman named Maya, wiping grease from her cheek. "It bent light enough to blind a short-range scanner for 3.2 seconds. Daniel nodded. "Good, we don't need to hide forever." Just long enough to get close. They weren't building weapons, not in the traditional sense. They were building tricks, illusions, gaps in perception. Earth had never matched the Concorde in firepower, but it had always outthought its limits. Now that was its only advantage. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Nora Ellis stood on the deck of a research vessel in the middle of Lake Michigan. The water around them was calm, but beneath the surface, something hummed. Her team had spent weeks adapting sonar resonance tech, once used to track whale migrations, into something far more disruptive. By syncing low-frequency pulses across thousands of underwater nodes, they could create interference fields that mimicked solar flares or magnetic storms. To an alien sensor array, Earth's oceans would look like chaotic noise hiding everything beneath. "It's ready," said Leo, a quiet oceanographer with a knack for signal theory. "We can blanket the Atlantic in under an hour if needed." Nora looked at the horizon. "They think oceans are just water. They don't know we've turned them into shields." Across the planet, similar efforts unfolded in silence. In the deserts of Arizona, farmers retrofitted irrigation drones with microjammers that scattered false heat signatures. In the mountains of Nepal, monks in ancient monasteries helped power hidden relay stations using geothermal vents. In Antarctica, scientists sealed themselves inside ice-buried labs, working on algorithms that could predict Concorde patrol patterns by analyzing their past movements, like reading footprints in snow. No one gave orders from the top. There was no central command. Instead, a new kind of coordination emerged, organic, decentralized, human. People shared blueprints through old video games, hid code in music files, passed coordinates through poetry posted on public boards. The conquered watched Earth's surface with their satellites, but they saw only what Earth wanted them to see, a planet resigned to its fate. But beneath that calm surface, a storm was gathering. The conquered grew confident. Their daily reports noted no hostile activity, population compliance stable, 0 attempts at communication. Their commanders relaxed. Patrol rotations became predictable. Ships followed the same paths, scanned the same zones at the same times. They assumed Earth had accepted its sentence. They mistook stillness for surrender. They did not notice the small things. The way certain weather balloons lingered too long in the upper atmosphere. The way commercial cargo drones occasionally vanished from tracking for a few seconds, just long enough to drop a package into the ocean. The way every child's tablet now ran a harmless-looking puzzle app that, in the background, helped simulate evasion routes for future missions. Daniel's team completed the first prototype of their stealth tug. They called it Wren, small, quick, and easily overlooked. On a moonless night, they launched it from a disguised silo in New Mexico. It rose silently, its gravitic field bending starlight around it like water around a stone. For 17 minutes, it orbited undetected, slipping between Concorde sensor sweeps. Then it returned, landing in a dry lake bed with barely a whisper. In the debrief, Daniel didn't smile. But his shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. "They don't see us," he said. "Not yet." Nora's team ran their first full-scale test over the Pacific. A Concorde scout drone passed overhead, scanning for energy signatures. Below, the ocean erupted with false signals, phantom reactors, ghost ships, entire cities that didn't exist. The drone circled twice, then moved on, logging the area as geologically unstable. Nora allowed herself a small laugh. "Let them think our planet is broken," she said. "It'll make what comes next even sweeter." Time passed. The blockade held. But Earth was no longer waiting. It was weaving a net, one thread at a time, one mind at a time. The Concorde believed they had caged a species. But cages only work if the animal inside believes it's trapped. Humanity had never believed that. In basements, garages, university labs, and forgotten military bunkers, people worked not for glory, not for revenge, but for the simple, stubborn truth that no one else would protect their home. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't salute flags. They fixed engines, coded signals, grew food, taught children, and in between they built the tools that would one day turn the tables. The conquered saw silence and called it defeat. But silence can also be the sound of a billion minds working in unison, each one a spark in the dark. And soon, those sparks would ignite. The conquered fleet drifted in perfect formation near the far side of the moon, their silver hulls catching the pale light of a distant sun. Routine patrol. Standard sweep. Nothing to report. Captain Vex of the cruiser Varelian Dawn sipped his nutrient broth and watched the sensor logs scroll by. Empty space, cosmic dust, the occasional meteor fragment. Earth had been quiet for weeks. Too quiet. But the Senate had assured them the humans were broken. No threat remained. Then the Varelian Dawn vanished. One moment it was there, a steady blip on every nearby ship's display. The next, nothing. No explosion. No distress call. No energy surge. Just silence. The other cruisers scanned the area, fired probe drones, even sent a shuttle to investigate. They found no debris, no radiation, no trace at all. It was as if the ship had never existed. At first, the Conquered Command dismissed it as a system glitch. Maybe a rare quantum fluctuation in the lunar shadow. But when the scout vessel Kestrasai disappeared 2 days later while monitoring the asteroid belt, panic began to stir. Then came the third loss, a supply frigate near Mars, cut off mid-transmission while reporting unusual gravitational readings. The Senate demanded answers. Fleet commanders reviewed every log, every image, every second of data. They found nothing. No weapons fire, no cloaked attackers, no signs of sabotage. Earth's surface remained dark, its cities dim, its signals silent. Yet their ships kept vanishing. What they didn't know was that Earth had stopped playing by their rules. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a command center carved into solid granite, Daniel Carter watched a small red dot blink out on his screen. That was the third conquered vessel erased from existence in 10 days. He didn't cheer. He didn't even smile. He just turned to Maya and said, "Run diagnostics on Ren 2, we're going again tonight." The secret wasn't firepower. It was physics, humanity's oldest ally. While the conquered relied on brute force shields and plasma cannons, Earth scientists had spent the quarantine studying something older, stranger, micro-wormholes. Tiny, unstable folds in space-time, lasting less than a second, impossible to detect unless you knew exactly when and where to look. They couldn't be used for travel, not safely. But they could be used as traps. Using repurposed asteroid deflection thrusters and quantum-entangled decoys disguised as drifting space junk, Earth's teams lured Concorde ships into precise coordinates. At the exact moment a ship entered the zone, a controlled energy pulse would trigger a micro-wormhole. The ship would be pulled in, folded through a sliver of warped reality, and crushed into non-existence before it could send a signal. The wormhole would collapse instantly, leaving no trace. It was risky. One miscalculation and the pulse could tear open a rift that swallowed half the moon. But Daniel's team had run thousands of simulations. They knew the margins. They knew the cost of failure. And they knew the cost of doing nothing was far worse. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Ocean, Nora Ellis stood on the deck of a converted fishing trawler, her eyes fixed on a sonar display. A Concorde drone hovered 300 kilometers above, scanning for hidden activity. Below the waves, thousands of autonomous buoys pulsed in perfect rhythm, flooding the area with false signals, phantom reactors, ghost fleets, entire cities humming with power that didn't exist. The drone circled once, twice, then moved on, logging the region as geologically unstable, no signs of intelligent activity. Nora exhaled. "They still think oceans are just water," she said to Leo, who stood beside her, arms crossed. Let them keep thinking that. Her team had done more than jam signals. They'd turned Earth's oceans into a living shield. Bioelectric pulses mimicked solar flares. Thermal vents disguised launch signatures. Even schools of fish tagged with microtransmitters helped scatter sensor beams. The Concorde saw chaos. Earth saw cover. Back in the command center, Daniel reviewed footage from Ren 1's last mission. The stealth tug had drifted near a Concorde patrol route, released a cluster of decoys shaped like old satellite parts, then vanished into the shadow of a dead comet. Within minutes, a cruiser altered course to investigate the debris. That was all it took. One pulse, one fold. One less enemy in the sky. "We're not fighting a war," Daniel told his team later that night. "We're playing a game of hide-and-seek with gods. And we're the ones who know where all the hiding spots are." The Concorde, meanwhile, grew nervous. Patrols doubled. Ships flew in tighter formations. Commanders ordered constant sensor sweeps. But every time they looked harder, Earth gave them more noise to drown in. Fake signals from the Amazon rainforest, heat blooms in the Sahara, energy spikes from abandoned oil rigs in the North Sea. None of it was real, but all of it was convincing. Then came the breakthrough. A young programmer in Bangalore, working with farmers in Iowa through a shared simulation network, noticed a pattern in Concorde patrol rotations. They always avoided the Jovian relay during magnetic storms. Always. Using that knowledge, Earth's hidden fleet, made of retrofitted cargo haulers, mining drones, and even old space tourism shuttles, began staging near Jupiter's shadow, waiting. The first real strike happened there, not with missiles, not with lasers, but with swarms. Thousands of autonomous mining drones, each no bigger than a suitcase, emerged from the icy craters of Ganymede. They carried no warheads, just plasma cutters meant for slicing through asteroid rock. Guided by civilian volunteers playing what looked like a space strategy game on their home computers, the drones swarmed a Concorde armada sent to investigate suspicious activity near the moons. The Concorde ships fired. Their beams cut through hundreds of drones, but thousands more closed in, latching onto hulls, slicing through sensor arrays, overloading power conduits. Within minutes, the armada was blind, crippled, drifting. Then from the darkness, Ren-class tugs appeared, not to fight, but to herd. They nudged the disabled ships into pre-marked coordinates. Another pulse. Another fold. Another silence. 17 minutes after the first drone appeared, the armada was gone. In the command center, Daniel finally allowed himself to lean back. On the main screen, the tactical map showed a clean sector. No red dots, No threats. Just empty space where an enemy fleet used to be. Nora received the news via encrypted burst from a buoy near Hawaii. She didn't speak. She just looked up at the stars and whispered, "You thought we'd roll over. Now you'll learn what happens when you corner a species that bill." T-submarines in storms and cities in deserts, the Concorde still had numbers. They still had firepower, but they no longer had certainty. And in war, uncertainty is the first crack in the armor. Earth had drawn blood, not with rage but with patience. Not with noise but with silence. And the galaxy would soon learn that the quietest species is often the most dangerous. The Senate chamber trembled, not from sound, but from fear. Delegates who once spoke with calm authority now whispered in corners, their eyes darting to the central display where loss reports piled up like falling leaves. The Varelian Dawn, the Kestra's Eye, the entire 7th Enforcement Armada near Jupiter. Gone. No wreckage, no survivors, no explanation. Only silence from the edge of human space. Panic spread faster than any fleet could fly. The Lumari Collective demanded immediate withdrawal of all non-essential vessels. The Krell hegemony called for total bombardment. But even they hesitated. Something was wrong. Earth wasn't fighting like a cornered animal. It was fighting like a shadow. Everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning, vanishing without trace. On Earth, no one celebrated. There was no parade, no victory speech. People simply kept working. In Nairobi, engineers linked solar farms to hidden battery arrays buried beneath old subway tunnels. In Oslo, teenagers coded swarm algorithms inside retro gaming consoles, their fingers flying over keys as they guided drone patterns across simulated skies. In Jakarta, shipbuilders welded hull plates in flooded dry docks, using tidal currents to mask the sound of their work. The conquered had assumed humanity needed governments, armies, and factories to resist. They were wrong. Earth resisted with classrooms, kitchens, and community centers, with farmers sharing weather data that doubled as evasion maps, with musicians embedding frequency codes in new songs, with children solving orbital puzzles that unknowingly optimized real strike paths. It wasn't a war machine. It was a living network, and every person was a node. Daniel Carter stood in the command center, watching a live feed from a drone near Saturn's rings. A Concorde supply convoy drifted in formation, unaware that thousands of ice mining bots, repurposed and armed with nothing but focused microwaves, were closing in from the shadow of Enceladus. The bots didn't attack. They simply overloaded the convoy's comms relays with bursts of static shaped like solar wind. Confused, the lead ship signaled for backup. That was the mistake. Within minutes, 3 Wren-class tugs emerged from the rings, silent and dark. They released a cloud of reflective chaff that scattered sensor beams. Then, using precise gravitic pulses, they nudged 2 of the supply ships into a pre-calculated fold zone. The micro-wormhole opened and closed in less than a heartbeat. 2 ships gone. The rest scattered in chaos. Back on Earth, Daniel turned to Maya. "They're learning to fear empty space," he said. "That's our advantage." Meanwhile, Nora Ellis coordinated a different kind of battle. From a floating lab off the coast of Chile, she oversaw the deployment of the latest biojamming array. Thousands of modified plankton, engineered to emit low-level electromagnetic pulses, were released into the Humboldt current. As they drifted toward the equator, they created a living fog that scrambled long-range scans. To the conquered, the entire South Pacific now looked like a storm-racked wasteland. Perfect cover for the hidden launch bays being activated beneath Easter Island. Her team had also cracked something bigger. By studying old progenitor ruins found deep in the Mariana Trench, structures older than human civilization, they discovered that certain resonant frequencies could temporarily disrupt artificial gravity fields. They tested it on a captured Concorde probe. 1 pulse and the probe's internal systems collapsed like a house of cards. Now every coastal city had hidden emitters ready to fire that frequency the moment a warship entered low orbit. The tide had turned, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 small ones. The conquered could no longer trust their sensors. Their patrols grew hesitant. Their supply lines frayed. Ships that once flew in proud formation now kept wide distances, scanning constantly, jumping at shadows. Then came the Jovian relay. The Concorde, desperate to reclaim control, sent their largest remaining force, a dreadnought-led fleet of over 200 vessels, to crush what they believed was Earth's main shipyard hidden in the asteroid belt. They arrived to silence. No defenses, no signals, just drifting rocks and dead comms buoys. What they didn't see were the miners. For months, Earth had been quietly converting asteroid mining drones into weapons, not by adding guns, but by rewiring their navigation systems to act as a single mind. Guided by civilian volunteers across 6 continents, farmers in Iowa, students in Manila, retirees in Lisbon, the swarm waited in the dark craters of Ganymede. When the fleet entered the belt, the drones activated. Thousands of them poured from hiding, moving in perfect sync, not as machines but as a single organism. They didn't fire. They swarmed, latching onto hulls, slicing through sensor domes with industrial cutters, flooding engine vents with conductive dust. The conquered ships fired wildly, destroying hundreds, but for every drone lost, 10 more took its place. Within minutes, the fleet was blind. Then the tugs arrived. Wren-class vessels, small and fast, darted between the crippled ships, planting gravitic charges on precise coordinates, not to explode but to fold. One by one, the Concorde vessels were nudged into micro-wormholes. The Dreadnought, the pride of the hegemony's navy, vanished last. Its final transmission a garbled scream of static. 17 minutes after the first drone appeared, the sector was empty. In the Senate, silence fell like a stone. No one spoke. No one moved. The display showed 0 contacts where a mighty fleet had once been. Senator Lyra stared at the screen, her armored fingers trembling. For the first time, she understood. Earth wasn't just resisting. It was teaching them a lesson. On Earth, there was no cheering. Daniel watched the feed go dark and simply said, "Next target." Nora closed her eyes and whispered coordinates into a secure line. In a village in Vietnam, a grandmother powered up a hidden relay using a hand crank generator. In a basement in Berlin, a group of teenagers uploaded new evasion patterns to the global mesh. The conquered still had numbers. But Earth had something better, unity. Not forced by law, but chosen by will. Every person in their own way was part of the fight. Not because they wanted war, but because they refused to be erased, and the galaxy began to notice. Neutral systems stopped broadcasting conquered propaganda. Trade routes shifted. Whispers spread of a species that turned silence into strength, that made weakness into weapon, that fought not to conquer, but to exist. The Senate had tried to break Earth by cutting it off. Instead, they had forged it into something unbreakable. Now Earth was no longer defending. It was advancing, quietly, patiently, inexorably, and the conquered had no idea what came next. The Senate's final vote came in the dead of cosmic night, when even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Panic had replaced pride in the chamber. Reports flooded in from every sector. Ships lost, patrols ambushed, supply lines severed. Earth was no longer a quarantined world. It was a ghost that hunted gods. Desperate, the Krell hegemony pushed for the ultimate solution: orbital bombardment. Wipe the surface clean, end the threat forever. The motion passed with trembling hands and hollow eyes. The dreadnoughts powered up their planet cracker cannons, their cores glowing with enough energy to crack continents. But before the first shot could fire, every Concorde vessel in the system received a transmission. Not through official channels, not from any known frequency. It came through every screen, every speaker, every comms unit, even those long thought secure. The image was simple: Earth rotating slowly, bathed in blue and green light. Overlaid on its surface were thousands of red markers pulsing like heartbeats. Each one sat in a tectonic fault line, an ocean trench, a polar ice cap. Places the conquered had ignored as geologically dead. Then a voice spoke. Calm, female, human. You ruled against us. You called us primitives. But you never asked what we've been building while you watched from your gilded chambers. These aren't missiles. They're resonance keys. Activate your weapons and we activate ours. Not to destroy you, but to wake the dormant defense systems left behind by the progenitors. The ones your ancestors fled from. Silence swallowed the Senate whole. Every delegate froze. Even the Krell, hardened by centuries of conquest, went still. The progenitors were not myth. They were memory, carved into ruins on dead worlds, whispered in nursery rhymes on ancient colonies, buried in the oldest data vaults. A civilization so advanced they reshaped galaxies, then vanished, leaving behind warnings etched in stone. Do not disturb the sleepers. Earth had not just survived isolation. It had dug, and it had found. In Houston, Daniel Carter stood beside Lily in their backyard watching the night sky. He didn't need to explain what was happening. She understood. On her small tablet, a live feed showed the conquered fleet hovering over Earth, weapons charged but unmoving. "Are they scared, Dad?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "and they should be." In Chicago, Nora Ellis stood on the lakeshore, arms crossed, eyes on the horizon. Her team had spent weeks calibrating the resonance keys, devices built from progenitor fragments recovered from the Mariana Trench in the Antarctic ice. They didn't explode, they sang. A single frequency, tuned to awaken ancient machines buried deep in Earth's crust. Machines older than life itself, designed not for war but for balance. The Conquered knew what that meant. If triggered, those systems wouldn't just defend Earth. They would reset the entire sector, erasing all advanced technology within light years, including the Concorde's own homeworlds. The Senate rescinded the bombardment order within the hour. Within a week, unarmed envoys landed in Geneva. They came not with demands but with questions. How did you find the progenitor sites? What do the keys control? Can they be disarmed? Earth's answer was simple. We do not threaten. We protect, and we choose who walks among us. Earth never asked to join the Conquered. It simply opened its borders, invited observers, and began sharing fragments of recovered knowledge, but only with those who proved worthy. Not through strength, but through respect. Farmers in Kenya taught alien botanists how to grow food in poisoned soil. Engineers in Brazil showed Krell technicians how to build clean water systems from scrap. A child in Mumbai solved a quantum puzzle that had stumped Lumari scientists for decades. The galaxy learned something new. Humanity's greatest weapon was not its tech, but its heart. Its ability to adapt, to share, to turn enemies into students. Years later, Daniel sat with Lily in their backyard observatory, helping her calibrate a gravitic lens they'd built from old satellite parts. She pointed to a bright star. "Is that where the Lumari live now?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "They moved their embassy here last month." Said Earth's gravity feels honest. Nora led an international team studying alien coral reefs blooming in the Pacific, life forms seeded by progenitor terraforming systems, now thriving thanks to human care. She often thought of the Senate's final mistake. They had judged humanity by its past, its wars, its mistakes, its noise. They never saw its future, quiet, steady, relentless. The Concord still existed, but it was changed. The old Senate was dissolved. In its place rose a new council, one where Earth held no special seat, yet its voice carried weight simply because it had earned trust. Not through force, but through patience. Not through fear, but through example. In the galaxy, it no longer saw Earth as a fringe world. It saw it as a teacher, a reminder that the most dangerous species isn't the one with the biggest guns. It's the one that never stops learning, adapting, and remembering. The vote against Earth had been meant as an end. Instead, it became a beginning. For humanity, for the galaxy, for everything that came after, and the Senate, they never voted against Earth again.